Good morning, everyone. I'm Becky Roloff, and I'm president of St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. St. Kate's is the largest women's university in the United States. And I'm just so pleased today to be able to moderate this panel today for you. And thank you for joining us. This is the third annual Loft Wordplay Book Festival. And St. Catherine's University and our dedication to liberal arts. We sponsor this along with the Star Tribune and also with Ryan Reed's. Ryan Companies is one of our great developers in the Twin Cities, and they have a program about reading too. So thank you to our sponsors who help make all these great events in our lives possible. We also have a tradition for all of us to acknowledge that the state of Minnesota and St. Catherine University is located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The Loft and Open Book are also built within the homelands of the Dakota people. And the Loft recognizes, as does St. Catherine's, the original peoples of this place, and we affirm their tribal sovereignty. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. You can ask the authors questions directly using the Q&A function feature, which we're all now fully capable of doing in the last year and a half. The event will be recorded, and you are welcome to listen to this rebroadcast through June 1st. Please buy the author's books using the link below. I read them all. I learned a lot. I can't wait to buy them for my granddaughter and my grandson. They are simply wonderful, wonderful stories, and we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that. And again, at the end, there's going to be a little survey. We would love it if you would take that survey so that we could ever improve wordplay as we go forward into the future. The agenda is roughly, and that will be my job to ensure that we do it roughly about 30 to 35 minutes for questions and my moderating the panel, and then about 20 minutes for Q&A. So please think of those questions along the way, and I'll do my best to help us reach those goals. So with that as background and context, let me very briefly introduce our panel today, because I know we're all anxious to hear more about the author's comments and how this great series came to be. First of all is Chelsea Clinton. Welcome, Chelsea, to this panel. And she's the author of so many wonderful series and books. But there's a #1 New York Times best-selling picture book, She Persisted, 13 American Women Who Changed the World. I love that book. I have that one too. She's also the author of numerous other books and series, such as Grandma's Gardens, co-written with her mother, Hillary Rodham Clinton, as well as the book of Gutsy Women, Favorite Stories of Courage and Resilience. The list of her published works is long, impressive, and very, very important to our conversation. She is also the vice chair of the Clinton Foundation. She works on many initiatives helping to empower women and the next generation of leaders. We follow the Clinton Foundation because the mission of St. Catherine University is we educate women to lead and influence. So we thank you for everything to empower this next generation of leaders, men and women. She lives in New York City with her husband, Mark, their children, and their dog, Soren. You can follow her on Twitter at Chelsea Clinton or on Facebook at facebook.com/Chelsea Clinton. So welcome again, Chelsea. Sayantani DasGupta is on my screen. She's on my right. I don't know where she is on your screens. She is the New York Times best-selling author of the critically acclaimed Bengali folktale and string theory inspired Kira Malala and the Kingdom Beyond books, the first of which, The Serpent's Secret, was a Bank Street Best Book of the Year, a book list Best Middle Grade Novel of the 21st Century, and now an E.B. White Read Aloud Honor Book. She's a pediatrician by training, but now teaches at Columbia University. When she's not reading or writing, she spends time watching cooking shows with her trilingual children. Very impressive. She's a team member of We Need Diverse Books and can be found online at Sayantani DasGupta, SAYANTANIDASGUPTA.com, and on Twitter at Sayantani, same spelling, 16. Okay, and I think those will come up later for people to get the correct spelling going forward. Welcome, Michelle Knudsen. She's a New York Times best-selling author of 50 books for young readers of all ages, including the award-winning book, Library Lion, which was selected by Time Magazine as one of the 100 best children's books of all time. Michelle also works as a freelance editor, as a writing teacher. She serves on the Writing for Young People on the MFA faculty at Lesley University and lives in Brooklyn, New York. So Michelle, welcome to this. And last but not least, we have Meg Medina. She's a New York Times best-selling and award-winning author who writes for children and teens. She's won numerous awards for her books, including the Ezra Jack Keats Award, as well as the Pura Belpré Award and Honor. She is a 2019 Newbery Award winner for her novel, Merci Suarez Changes Gears. When she is not writing, she works on community projects that support Latinx youth. She lives with her family in Richmond, Virginia. So welcome to all of you. How wonderful and what stunning careers and what great examples you all are already for all the young women in our country and around the world. So, so pleased to be with you. So Chelsea, let me start with you. I think you're the gatherer and the original, we're gonna call you the heirloom seed of this idea. And we love heirloom things. So you're the heirloom seed of this. All roads will lead back to you on this. But this new chapter book series was inspired by your research for some of your earlier She Persisted picture books. Why were you moved to create this new series for a new age group? I would say these would be targeted more for the younger part of middle school age group, but what's the story behind that, Chelsea?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Becky, so much. And thank you to the university. And I also just really want to acknowledge how wonderful it is we have an ASL interpreter. So thank you, Jason, and thank you to the university and to the festival for truly facilitating an inclusive event. And Becky, thank you for that question. and goodness, I've never thought of myself as an heirloom seed. I don't quite know how I'm going to explain that to my kids. We try to each tell kind of 3 things about our day, and definitely at dinner tonight, being termed an heirloom seed is going to be one of my 3 things, but I'm going to have to do probably a little more online research to understand what an heirloom seed is. And I'm so honored to be in this persisterhood. And really the answer to your question, though, Becky, is readers and their families. Just the response to the first picture book, certainly, and then the subsequent picture books, was thankfully like such a generous embrace. And especially being on book tours and hearing from young readers how much more they wanted to learn about the women who had inspired me and were clearly inspiring them, really planted the seed for kind of thinking, how do we build on this enthusiasm and answer this enthusiasm of young readers, of both girls and boys alike. So I was so happy to hear you talk about kind of bringing these books to your granddaughter and your grandson. And so it just seemed quite natural to have chapter books, especially given kind of that these chapter books coming out this year, coming out a few years after the first picture book. And so, many of the kids who would have read that first picture book or had that first picture book read to them by their parents, by their grandparents, are now themselves able to read the chapter books. I certainly see that, just in my own family with my daughter. She's reading Nellie Bly now. And she's like, the best part about this, she's like, Mom, did you know? That's what she says to me. She's, Mom, did you know? And I'm like, well, yeah, I knew because I got a sneak peek at the books, but I still want to know everything that you want to tell me. So it's just, I see that kind of the magical kind of journey of young readers in my own home, of kind of the graduation from picture books to chapter books. And I'm so thankful that the She Persisted Persisterhood and these extraordinary authors kind of on the screen today, are bringing these kind of more fleshed out versions of these amazing women into young, albeit slightly older, young readers' lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, however we all learn, it's never too late. And the earlier we plant those seeds for both little boys and little girls is so important. So I'm going to go to each of the panelists one by one and just share a little bit about the story that you wrote about and what drew you to that story, to want to tell that story. You've all told many, but why that one in particular? And Sayantani, let's start with you on what drew you to tell your story of the great doctor.
So thank you so much. So I'm Sayantani DasGupta, and I wrote the story of Dr. Virginia Apgar, who is the physician, the anesthesiologist, who came up with the very first test that many of our listeners, if not all, of the folks attending this festival panel, probably everyone on the panel experienced. It's the newborn test that helps midwives, birth attendants, physicians, nurses understand how healthy a newborn baby is. And it's a systematic way of really looking at how well a baby's breathing, how their heart rate is, how their movements are, how they're reacting to their environment, in order to kind of get a systematic understanding of how healthy a newborn baby is at 1 minute of life and then at 5 minutes of life. So I was drawn to tell Dr. Apgar's story because I too am a doctor. I'm a pediatrician, so a children's doctor. And when I was in practice, the Apgar score was something that I used all the time. Every time a newborn baby is born in the hospital, pediatricians are called right to the nursery or to the birthing room to do an assessment. And it was something that was, as common to my pediatric practice as kind of the ABCs. It was something, it was something in my day-to-day repertoire. And yet, until I wrote the story of Dr. Apgar, there was so much about this remarkable woman that I didn't know. I knew that she became a physician at a time when there were very few women doctors. I knew that she must have, or I guessed that she must have faced sexism and roadblocks and discouragements. What I didn't know was how remarkably energetic, funny, resilient, kind Dr. Apgar was. And a lot of those qualities are what helped her negotiate this difficult path of being a woman physician when she was, and it helped her succeed.
And there was a suggestion. I went back and I found my boys' Apgar scores because I kept them in their little book, and sure enough, there it was. And it was just thrilling to read that story. Michelle, Nellie Bly.
Sorry, I've got a siren behind me. That's Brooklyn Life. So I wrote about Nellie Bly. That's my book. And Nellie Bly led the way in the early development of so-called stunt journalism, a field which eventually led to the kind of investigative reporting that we have today. And she opened the door for a lot of women journalists who came after her by refusing to write. There were other women journalists before Nellie Bly, but they were mostly sort of confined to the women's pages of the newspaper. And Nellie Bly refused to write just about the things that women were supposed to be interested in and the things that women were supposed to want to write about, and really pushed to write about things that she cared about that meant something to her. I first learned about her actually through one of my friend's books. Matt Phelan wrote an amazing graphic novel called Around the World, which told about three different amazing around the world journeys. And one of the things Nellie Bly is famous for is breaking the record of the fastest trip around the world. She was actually racing against the fictional record set in Jules Verne's book, Around the World in 80 Days. And she thought she could do it in 75 days. She actually did it in 72 days and change. And so I learned that story from Matt's book, and I knew that there was so much more to Nellie Bly that I wanted to find out about. So writing this book was an amazing experience because she did so many incredible things in her life that I had no idea about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michelle. And Meg, Sonia Sotomayor, our Supreme Court Justice.
Oh, yes. So what wouldn't draw me to it, right? Sonia Sotomayor is just a titan in terms of how the Latino and Hispanic community sees her. She was the third woman and the only Latino on the Supreme Court. And so, it just felt like such a huge honor to be asked to write her story. And also, like, in companion to that, I just want to say that it felt like an enormous honor to be in the company of the authors writing this series and Chelsea Clinton. So like all those things together, we're screaming, write this book, Meg. And so I started to do research, and what really drew me to her intensely was our New York connection. I'm a Queens girl. I grew up in Flushing, Queens. And she grew up in the Bronx. And so as I was finding out more about her and reading about her, I just fell in love with the notion of this girl that had very similar growing experiences as I had. Her family spoke Spanish at home. There was economic need. She wasn't particularly in love with school as a child. And all of those things sort of fed into my commitment to write stories that celebrate kids from marginalized communities, certainly, and from communities where it's very easy for people to overlook and to assume that they're not going to find these brilliant diamonds in the kids there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Chelsea, the question I thought of last night was, how do you find these authors? Do you find them or do they find you?
So some of the authors, including some who are on the screen today, I knew of. I mean, we love the Library Lion in our house very much. As one kind of example, I think we didn't read it last night, admittedly. I think we read it 2 nights ago, but it is a frequent kind of bedtime story in our home. And then when we were kind of when my wonderful editor, Jill Santopolo, who edited the series as well, and I, decided that we wanted to expand into chapter books, she had some authors that she thought might be kind of good fits for some of the women. I had some ideas. We also read lots of chapter books that were at the level that we kind of aspired for these books to be in. And then Jill reached out to authors, and I'm just so grateful that like truly all of our first choices said yes. So I'm so just proud and honored and excited, and a little bit tickled that like everything we hoped would happen actually has happened, and that the reception of the books has been, as we imagined it would be, just so positive from kids, importantly, and also from parents and teachers and librarians.
Mm-hmm. Santiana, I'm going to come back to you with the question. You mentioned it a little bit, but clearly there have been tremendous gains made in the medical field. At St. Kate's, we send a lot of women here onto medical school and have a huge health science and clinical doctorate programs going on. But where do you think discrimination still exists for women in medicine? And what would be your advice to young women thinking of a medical career?
Sorry, thank you. It's Sayantani, actually. But absolutely, I think that this is a really important question. When Virginia Apgar went to medical school, she had to face not only the barrier of kind of the economic barrier, right, which many of us still have to face today. It was expensive. She went to Mount Holyoke, which her parents couldn't afford. So she had to get some scholarships and some support. And similarly, when she went to Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons, which happens to be the institution I also teach at, when she went to Columbia University for medical school, she had to get economic support. But not just that, she was one of only a handful of women in her medical school class. And that has changed. That is one thing that has changed. We are seeing in medical school classes across this country, sometimes, a close to 50% split in terms of gender, sometimes more women in a class. So that's something that's changed. But something that unfortunately hasn't changed is a bit of, hopefully it's changed somewhat, but it hasn't entirely disappeared, is what I mean to say, is a bit of the kind of unfortunate, sometimes exclusive or sexist culture that she faced. For instance, she had to struggle with being paid less than her male colleagues. She had to struggle with the fact that after conferences, there would be dinner parties at men-only clubs that she wasn't allowed to go to. There were rooms, call rooms, meaning overnight sleeping arrangements in the hospital for male physicians and not female physicians. So, those are some things that we've slowly changed. The one thing that happened to her, which is a little bit subtle, and sometimes it happens to women in medicine even today, is that a mentor of hers unfortunately discouraged her from going into her initial love, which was surgery. And he geared her towards anesthesiology, which was a primarily nursing and primarily female specialty at that point, because of her gender. And although she went on and had a booming anesthesiology career and made her mark in such important ways, I would say to young women entering medicine, or young people of non-dominant, gender identities entering medicine right now, to go to a place where you have community. That means in the school itself, but it may mean also outside of the school. So if you have a ton of family and close friends and community in New York or St. Paul, think about who's going to support you and lift you up, both inside and outside the institution. Think about where there are mentors who are going to not discourage you, but maybe believe in you and uplift you, and tell you to do more than you thought you could do, not less. So I would say to anyone entering medicine, You can't do it alone. None of these women did it alone. They found sources of support. And I would say, find your community, lean on your community, lean on those mentors, mentor each other, uplift each other. That would be my advice.
Sayantani, thank you so much. And that advice goes across all the professions we're talking about for these women.
Absolutely.
Michelle, the thought when thinking about Nellie Bly and today's world, she paved the way for female journalists in many ways today, some of the great reporting we have and moderating. But what if she was alive today, what news medium and in what role do you think Nellie Bly would be in today?
Well, Nellie Bly definitely loved to be in the spotlight. So I think she would be thrilled to be on television. I think that would be very exciting for her. And she was also really, really excellent at interviewing people and getting them to open up when she did newspaper and magazine interviews. So maybe she would like to do something like a TV talk show where she could really do like in-depth interviews with people, get them to open up. Although she also really loved investigative reporting. So there'd have to be like a segment where she could also still do like investigative reporting off screen and then like share it with her viewers. And I'm sure she'd also still be writing. I mean, she did so many things in her life that I assume that if she were alive today, she would still want to do all of those things. So I'm sure that there would still be some sort of print outlet for her, whether it be a newspaper column like she did for most of her life, or an advice column like she did later in life, or just more books about her amazing experiences. I'm sure she would still be doing lots and lots. She would be thrilled, I think, at all the additional ways in which she'd be able to explore journalism and connecting with her subjects and writing about them.
I think you're right. I think that's a great perspective. And Sonia Sotomayor, Supreme Court, racial justice, Minneapolis and St. Paul have certainly been in the spotlight in the last year. Hopefully on the road to more justice and a better place. But what do you think that means to her, particularly being a role model for young men and women thinking of the criminal justice system? Because she's in that system too and does great work in that system, right? We're all pleased that she's there. How do you think about that, Meg?
Well, I think, first of all, my mind is still spinning on all of these activities that teachers should be doing about Nellie Bly and Virginia Apgar. I'm seeing skits going on in classrooms, like as we're, modernizing them. Okay, your question. So I think Sonia Sotomayor, one of the gifts is that she is a living figure, and people get to see her impact in lifetime. And I think kids get to see the impact also on themselves, like being a Latino kid and seeing Sonia Sotomayor making decisions, being in the news, having her opinions, expressed and dissected and analyzed and so on. That is such an eye-opening experience for the child in terms of what they consider possible and acceptable and a possible road for themselves. You can't possibly overplay that for kids. That's such an important piece of what she's offering. As a living, as a living justice, I think that it's just vastly important to see how someone, her own personal experiences growing up in the Bronx, dealing firsthand with in communities sometimes where crime was an issue, where justice was an issue, where racial differences and discord and conversation were issues. All of those things formed who we have right now. And so it's exciting, I think, to see someone who's lived this experience be able to offer opinion and shape law and shape communities with her experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if the laws if the laws aren't right, everything else underneath that is not going to work as well as it could as if you have it right at the
Right.
top, and she's at the top
Right.
of those decisions. Chelsea, when a book about the woman who would define she persisted for us all, your mother, is she on the list?
Oh goodness. Not at the moment. Though she very much, she sneaks into the first picture book, you know, and I also just have to acknowledge, and I'm so sorry that I didn't do this earlier, just the wonderful illustrator, Alexandra Boyer, who has been such an extraordinary partner throughout this whole process, whose illustrations are on the cover of each of these three amazing women's books. Yes. So I mean, that is still like, that's Alexandra. And kind of when important, she was just so kind of not only willing, but like enthusiastic to make adjustments to some of her earlier illustrations that were in the picture book to ensure that they could kind of work as a cover. And I'm so thankful that she worked with me to kind of put in two women who admittedly don't have kind of spreads in the first picture book, but are hugely important to the story of the books, and certainly important, I think, to my life and to our lives, of my mom, admittedly, who's kind of there in the gallery, and then Coretta Scott King, whose bust is also kind of in the opening gallery. So no plans, but I'm sure the honest answer is, I'm sure, Becky, at some point. So we admittedly already have, because thankfully, like this series has done so well, we already have kind of more chapter books planned for next year, which I'm really excited for, and we'll be excited to talk about them when we can do so. And she's not in that slate, but at some point.
Well, she would be the definition, wouldn't she, of persistence and grace. And
certainly inspires me. I mean, she and my grandmother's, I actually was thinking earlier, listening, and I don't think I'd quite understood, actually, Sayantani, that anesthesiology had been such a kind of a province for women, even reading the book, until I heard kind of you just kind of talk about that more. And my paternal grandmother, my dad's mom, actually left my dad when he was a very little boy, because her husband had died in a car accident while she was pregnant. She was a single mom, and they had no money, and she was determined to literally earn a better life for her and her son. And so she left him with relatives, and she went to nursing school, and she knew that if she could become a nurse anesthetist, she would be able to earn a higher salary. But I'll never forget when she told me after she retired that she had never understood that she also would earn more respect. And that she just always felt so respected by the male physician she was working with, in a way that she knew that many of her kind of nursing colleagues didn't, unfortunately. And I don't think I'd quite understood kind of the historical context of that just personal story in our family's life until you were explaining it. So thank you for that gift today. And all a long ramble to say, Becky, yes, at some point,
Well,
there will be a book about my mom, I'm sure, but it's not in the planning yet.
Yeah, I remember that part about your grandmother too. I'll start this next question with a comment from me. I admired many things in the books, and thank you for reminding us of the beautiful illustrations in that too, Chelsea. But one of the things that I noticed was that none of you, the authors here, you didn't shy away from hard topics in the book. In fact, very personal ones in a family. Nellie Bly had a drunk and very violent stepfather, right? Which you handled very well. Sonia Sotomayor, mother, was likely suffering from depression with all the changes in her family and how that affected Sonia. And then Virginia Apgar's family, Sayantani, you mentioned that a little bit, really had financial difficulties that never gave her any kind of stability. I think there was a lot of love there, not violence, or other things that we know about, but still not a secure platform to go forward on. Why, any of you can comment on this. Why is that important to do? And how much do you decide to include for a middle school audience on some of these harder things? And I think in my opinion, I'm not a psychologist, I thought you handled that all beautifully, just at the right level, which was honest, but it didn't take the story down a road you could never get back out of, if that's a way to describe it. So I'd open it up to any of you.
I mean, I'll just hop in real quick to say that I think that the readership of the She Persisted books, for those listening, is even younger. It's, I think, a good 6 to 9 year old age range. So your question is even more poignant, because how do you write about difficult, challenging issues for a 6 to 9 year old? And I think it's really important because although all of these women persisted, and they persisted through adversity and through challenge, to me, the really important thing was not to only give weight and honor to individual persistence, but also to look at the fact that there are structures in place, like economics, like family structures, like violence, like racism. There are structures in place which make it harder for some of us to persist than others. And so even as we're encouraging our readers to persist, we're also encouraging them to help change the system so it's fair or more fair for all of us. And so that all of us, through our strength and perseverance, can persist. So to me, it was really important to say, for instance, in Virginia Apgar's case, that yes, she persisted, but she was also lucky. She happened to find the scholarship. She happened to find the economic support. Someone else with just as much brains, just as much heart, just as much talent might have persisted, but just not have found those lucky moments of support and community. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it was really important to balance the kind of individual with the structural. And if that makes sense, that was a big reason for me to include it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Meg or Michelle?
I'll say, I'm sorry, Michelle,
no,
you go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think something else that's important to keep in mind is that so many of these same or similar challenges that the women in these books experienced are things that young readers themselves experience in their own lives. And I think it's important to be honest about those challenges, and also to just to remove any kind of feelings of shame, or like there's all kinds of things that happen in all kinds of families, and the child is not responsible for their circumstances, right? And I think it's great to be able to look at the stories of other people who maybe dealt with similar problems, who maybe faced similar challenges, and to see how they overcame them, or how they dealt with them, or even just how they endured them, can be a really powerful thing for a child to see in a book about someone else.
Yeah, and I'll agree with both of those. Very smart things to say. And I would also just add, just plainly, this is nonfiction, right? And so in nonfiction, you don't have the luxury of being able to cut out the unpleasant parts or moving things around, for dramatic purpose. People's lives are their lives. And so the real challenge, I think, for writing for the very young, and in this case with nonfiction, is to say the truth, and to hold fast to the truth, and also to hold fast to your sense of respect for the child's age and experience, right? And so you have to marry those two things when you bring information to them. If I were writing the story of Sonia Sotomayor for someone 17, I would dive into other things. I mean, she also had, illness. She had diabetes. Her father likely died as a result of many years of alcoholism, and other really unpleasant things that she faced along the way. But I think it's a matter of how you present it, and the operative word, I think, would be with truth and with tact.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you all did that just beautifully, and I think it adds to the strength that the story gives when you're reading it to a young child. This is the last question before we start taking questions from the audience, but it's one of my favorite questions to ask in interviews, which is, what question did you most hope I would ask you today? that I didn't, and how would you answer it? So, Chelsea, you've had the most time to think here. I'm going to start with you. What did you hope I would ask you, and I didn't?
Oh, goodness. Maybe about other books, actually, in the series, because I'm so
Okay.
thankful that we're able to highlight kind of three amazing women who are very much kind of, I think, brought to life kind of by these three amazing authors. And yet these are three of the 13 chapter books that are coming out over the course of the year. Oh, goodness, I guess we're in May. So, quite a few have already come out, though there are still more to come. And I do think, building off of your kind of previous question, while Sonia Sotomayor is still alive, so is Ruby Bridges, who story we share kind of in the picture book and then now in a chapter book kind of coming out later this year. And, she was 6 when she, didn't miss a day of school, despite the kind of hate and rage and racism and just kind of vileness that she had to walk through every day to go to school. And so I do think that story is especially poignant for young readers, because that's someone their age, who persisted over something that I think should be unimaginable and yet still is all too imaginable for so many kids today.
Thank you. Meg, how about you?
Oh, I was sort of hoping that you would ask what I found the most surprising thing about the justice. And the thing that it's such a little random thing. Like I happen to adore the idea that she worked at a cheap clothing shop, telling people to put stuff back that they were slipping under their shirts and things like that. It felt so refreshingly relatable to me. And I was also surprised that she didn't love school as a very little girl. Late, she grew into that love. And I thought that was really an important thing for kids to know about her too, that you can grow in your relationship to school and to your education.
Yeah. And the trigger was reading for her, wasn't it? When
Yeah.
she finally
Yeah.
saw the world that opens up when you read. Michelle,
Mm-hmm.
what question did I miss with you?
I think this is another little tiny random thing. I haven't written a biography like this before. And so it was such a pleasure to kind of discover all these like little facts about her life, like these random interesting things. So one of the things I wish you had asked about was how she prepared for her around the world trip, because something that I found fascinating is that early on when she had this idea, one of the newspaper managers was like, a woman could never do this because she couldn't travel alone and she would have to bring too much luggage. So Nellie Bly brought one bag on her 72 plus day trip around the world. She wore one dress the entire time. Her bag was full of like her writing supplies, a jar of cold cream that she apparently could not live without, several changes of underwear. And she had a second dress and she couldn't fit it in the bag. So she just didn't bring it. And she just wore the one dress on her whole trip because it was so important to her to be able to like move quickly to prove that manager wrong, and not be slowed down by that, which I found fascinating. And there's a whole other part of the story where another newspaper sent another woman around the world in the other direction at the same time, which Nellie did not know about when she left for her trip. And that woman did bring a lot of luggage. And it may be one of the reasons that she, there's lots and lots of reasons. It was an amazing.
A good lesson for all of us, right?
Yeah.
Travel light, yeah.
Pack light. I have trouble with that, but I'm inspired by Nellie.
Yeah, one dress is kind of slim, but we could try it. And Sayantani, how about you?
I think I'll come back to something that Meg said earlier, which was, I wish you had asked what it meant to be a part of the She Persisterhood. It's been a lonely year, and being on Zoom and teaching on Zoom and doing conferences on Zoom. sometimes can feel isolating or sometimes can reinforce that sense of loneliness. And it has for me right now. I'm struggling I have a lot of extended family who are ill in India. COVID is really hitting very hard there right now. And it means a lot to be in community with extremely talented, strong, smart, lovely people. And so I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah, well, those are great answers to the question. So thanks for helping me out there. We're going to switch to Q&A now. We're in good shape on time. Very quickly, I'll go around the screen. What was a book that you read when you were younger that you believe has stood the test of time and is still relevant to read with little ones today? So Chelsea, why don't you start? What was a book that you read when you were younger that?
Oh, goodness. I'm trying to think of all the books that we read with our kids. I have a 1.5-year-old he loves Each Peach Pear Plum, which is one of the books that I really remember my parents reading to me. So I was like stumbling a little bit at the beginning when I was answering your question, because I was like, God, I think she wants something more profound. But the honest answer in my house right now is Each Peach Pear Plum.
Oh, and good that you can remember it. That's the best part of the whole thing. Meg, do you have one that stands out for you?
Yes, Charlotte's Web. I think that will always be the story of friendship and loyalty and sacrifice between friends.
Yeah. Michelle, do you have one?
The first one that comes to mind is The Grouchy Ladybug, which I stand behind because it was an early book about feelings and like a character who was not nice and not like trying to please everyone, and did not always behave very well. But by the end, there's another ladybug who shows compassion for the grouchy ladybug, and that's really important. And that really has stayed with me, and I think it stands up today.
Yeah. Sayantani, how about you?
My first instinct is my always go-to book, which is A Wrinkle in Time, Madeleine L'Engle. The first story that taught me that science and stories don't have to be two separate things, but they need each other. And so as a physician writer, that was a really important book for me. Plus I love space stories. But I was thinking about a younger age group. Did anyone read that Grover, the monster at the end of this book?
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Right?
Yes, I love that book.
It was like my first experience with metafiction, because Grover's both telling a story, but he's in the story. Like, he's scared of the monster who is himself. And like, what a more beautiful metaphor is that? So I still love that book.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great suggestions.
Sayantani, that I spoke about A Wrinkle in Time in my speech to introduce my mom at the 2016 convention, because I have like such deep, meaningful memories of like the conversations that we had about that book. I read it in 4th grade in Mrs. Porter's class. And it was like one of the first times I really felt like I got to have what at least felt to me like grown-up conversations with my mom about a book. So.
Oh, I love that. I didn't remember that, but it is about a girl. No, I mean, it's about a girl learning to be a leader, right? It's about leadership. So that's perfect, right? I read it in 5th grade in Mrs. Ernst's class.
Yeah.
Well,
Mrs. Porter and Mrs. Ernst. Sorry, Becky.
No. This was from a little 9-year-old. So hi, Siri. Thank you for watching. And she wanted to know, the first part was, we talked about how we choose which women to write to, write stories about. But if you could, each of you write a news story, who would you write that news story about, was her question, which was a good question. Anybody can jump in here if you've got something on your mind you've been thinking about.
Maybe since it's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I've been thinking a lot about kind of our beautiful, strong Asian American kind of activist elders, I would love to write about Yuri Kochiyama or Grace Lee Boggs, who were really strong examples of Asian American elders who were activists fighting, unafraid to do what's right.
Those are good suggestions. Are good notes to write down. As you're thinking about that, here's another one. Is there a channel for people to suggest to you and to whatever your structure is, to suggest a heroic female figure for consideration for a future book? You've all talked about that, but how do people suggest? Because I think there's probably so many great stories of persistences that all of us don't even know about and that exist.
Well, I'll answer this first, and then of course would love like everyone else to chime in that when I decided to write She Persisted Around the World, I knew there were some women who'd been really inspirational to me and whose stories I wanted to share, like Wangari Maathai, the extraordinary Kenyan environmentalist, activist, leader who started the Green Belt movement that's now planted close to 55 million trees across Eastern and Central Africa. And yet I knew there were just so many more women whose stories I wouldn't know because I hadn't encountered them yet. And so, I reached out to my friends, but also Jill, who we've mentioned a few times, who's the editor of the series, reached out across like the global family of Penguin Random House. And we got truly hundreds of suggestions of stories. And it was such a gift because then I got to learn about so many women whose stories I wouldn't have otherwise encountered. And probably about half of the women who we write about in She Persisted Around the World came through suggestions. So about half were women whose stories I already knew and wanted to include, and half were ones that I learned through that process. And I do think that process worked quite well. So I would say, like, please reach out to Jill Sanapolo at Penguin Random House, because she has a good track record of being able to help attract, but also then kind of catalog and keep track of people's story suggestions.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted. I was going to see if I could make it through one whole meeting because I didn't want anything to disturb it here, but thank you. Yeah, you are muted on our foreheads. This was something I thought of as a backup to the last question, but this person asked, not everyone can be highly visible or famous. How do we help people be inspired to be their best in everyday life by these examples? And what I thought about with the other question was, and I think about this as we come up to Mother's Day, is telling the people and writing the stories of the people who do inspire us, right? Who persist all around us, and be sure that you tell them that they're your role model for persistence and for inspiring you and keeping you going. So, but I believe the comment here was how do we really use these books so that we help people to be their best and to be inspired, because everyone isn't going to be in a book, but that doesn't mean they're important to a whole group of people's lives going forward. So do you have any examples or of where you think someone took your book or read the book and was inspired to do something that maybe they hadn't thought of before?
I think at the end of all the books, one of the features that I really enjoyed, they asked us to adhere to certain features in the chapter books for consistency. I happen to like the last section where we each had to brainstorm ideas, where a person who felt inspired by the person who they were reading about could do other activities. So for Sonia Sotomayor, like, can you start your own debate club? Can you, work on public speaking? Can you volunteer at a community organization, et cetera? So, the real question is, are you using your gifts for good in the world?
Mhm.
Are you adding in instead of taking away? And that's really the basic recipe, I think. And I don't know. I don't know how the other authors feel about that last chapter, but it was kind of fun to think about all the different things that somebody that age could do in preparation.
Yeah, I also loved that part. It was really fun to think of ideas for how someone who was inspired by the story could then do things in their own lives to sort of make that connection and carry that energy forward. But I was also thinking about what you said about how not everybody can be in a book, not everybody can be famous, but I think we can all be inspired by people just in our own lives. Like, I think young readers can think about just the people, their friends, their family, people in their school who they admire, and think about, well, why do you admire that person? Like, what is it about them that you love, that makes you feel happy, that makes you feel accepted? And then you can do those things yourself. You can try to be that same kind of person. You can be that same kind of friend to someone else. And even that might seem like a smaller accomplishment than some of the accomplishments of the women in these books, but all of those things are really important.
Mhm. Sayantani, did you want to add in anything?
No, I just agree heartily. I loved that last section. So I agree heartily with both of you.
Mhm. I think something that all of you did, and I wanted to give a couple of examples, like Michelle, what's for the audience, like in the last chapter of it from Nellie Bly, was join your school's newspaper, keep a journal and write down your thoughts and feelings, write letters to your elected officials to fight for equal pay for women and minorities, read books and articles written by women, encourage your friends to pursue their dreams, tell your family and friends a story. And I think that was such a smart thing that ties those books together so beautifully, is bring it down, because that's something that we could always do going forward. We have another question here, which is, and so I'll read it and one of you can jump in here. How would you handle some of the timely and difficult stories of those of brave women like Anita Hill or Christine Blasey Ford? Some of the current people still alive, like Sonia Sotomayor, handling some of the difficult stories of our times about women, for the 5 to 9 or 5 to 10-year-olds that you're talking about. Is there a particular one that you think about, or what you would suggest to this person asking this question?
All right, I'm going to jump in. I see we're all clamoring. So I'm going to say that I'm going to go back to the notion that, in the case of Anita Hill, right, it's a question of truth and honesty. Telling the truth, telling the truth when people disagree with you, telling the truth when people say that you're not. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you approach the topic, I don't think every topic is appropriate for every age necessarily, but if we were doing this one, I think that's what was at the basis there, right? And so it would be telling the story from a perspective of standing up for what is true and being able to speak it out.
And I would just, underline, Meg, what you said before about respecting the reader where they are. I think there are ways to talk about unfairness. I think that, in fact, young readers are they have a really strong sense of justice and what's fair and what's not fair. Saying the truth is important. I think those are issues that will hit them, in their hearts, and that they have a real sense of justice, young readers, and also maybe not defining somebody like Professor Hill by one incident in her life, but really seeing her as somebody with strengths and brilliance and other things that she did in the context of, yes, one particular challenging situation where people were doubting her but she told the truth, but she's also somebody with a rich and varied life. And so maybe contextualizing her life in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The person I thought of just from this morning's news, and this isn't a political comment, was Liz Cheney, and what she faced by being removed from her position of leadership for speaking what many people believe is the facts and the truth. And I thought there's a story to be told there too, and people who need, regardless of your political persuasion, but standing behind people who do take those risks and who do that, and you still face that in all the things that you do, right? But it's these steps forward, I think, that really help all of us to be able to manage it all going forward. So it's almost time. It's 10 o'clock on my my clock here, and I think we're coming close to the hour to wrap it all up. And I just wanted to truly thank all of you. I have a favorite saying, which it's the leader, it's always the leader. So Chelsea, thank you for the organizing principle of She's Persisting and being able to draw all these women in their other professional lives and doing this for these young readers. I just think you've given such a gift to all of us. Meg, I'm going to hold you to visiting St. Kate's when you're here teaching at Hamlin, and all of you, I'd love to give you the president's tour of one of the most beautiful campuses in the whole country. Michelle, we keep writing and we'll cheer on even more of our women reporters and interviewers who bring us so much truth. And Sayantani, thank you for giving all the women who are looking at health sciences and working to make that real. That's just inspiring for all of us. So this has really been an honor to meet you. I hope our paths cross sometimes, but I'm glad they crossed by a screen going forward. And I thank our interpreters too for the beautiful job that they did and all the help. So just in terms of saying goodbye to the audience here, thank you again to the Loft for hosting a Wordplay in the Twin Cities. I want to thank the whole team at St. Catherine University who brings us these great opportunities and helps us find a place to showcase the base we have for liberal arts upon which we build everything else at St. Catherine University. Ryan Reads, which is the Ryan Company's reading program and one of their many good outreaches into the community, and then to the Star Tribune. There's going to be a little survey sent to all of you at the end of this, and it's going to come to your inboxes. And it just helps if you can take a few seconds and do it. It just will help us make it better for next year. So truly, I wish all of you well in everything you do. You're just inspiring in your own right. And then you bring us all these beautiful stories of all these women. And I'm going to have that whole series and read them. And I learned a lot, and they'll be ready for my grandchildren, and they'll be underneath the gift tree too in the future going forward. And take good care, everyone. And to our entire audience, read good books. They're available at all ages and stages, and truly give us all a wonderful chance at a better life, I think, going forward. So again, take good care.
Thank you.
Well, yes.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank
Bye,
you
everybody.
so much.
Thank you all.
Okay. All right.
Thank
All
you.
right.